I know that it's going to be very controversial, but ESM is the only standard of JavaScript modules that's future-proof. And that's the direction that everybody is moving to.
Hi, I'm Paul, and welcome to PodRocket, a web development podcast brought to you by LogRocket. Today, we're going to be talking with Anthony Fu. Anthony is a framework developer over at Nuxt Labs, and we're going to be chatting about why he thinks developers should move to an ESM-only format. In this episode, Anthony and I are going to chat about why moving to ESM-only might be controversial in a dev world, the benefits of moving from CJS-first to then ESM-only, and why now might be a better time than ever to make the change, and what the future of an ESM world might look like and how us as developers might benefit. Here's our episode with Anthony Fu. Hi there, my name is Paul, and joining with us is Anthony Fu. We've had Anthony on before, and we're having him back again because we had a great conversation last time. And today we're going to dive back into the guttural depths of JavaScript. Specifically, we're going to talk about his recent blog post, moving to ESM only. Excited to dig in. This will probably be a spicy one. Welcome to the podcast, Anthony.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's going to be like I mentioned, I think this might be a little bit of a spicy one because there are some folks that are purists with the old way that JavaScript can work, and there's people that are open to embracing new things. This has been a big point of contention. Some libraries, some frameworks not working with one another. So the blog post is titled, Moving on to ESM Only. So what is ESM? If somebody's listening and they're newer to JavaScript, what is ESM? And then you could just hop right into what made you want to write this blog post and start shifting the perspective in your motivations.
I'm actually a little bit hesitant about writing this blog post because I know that it's going to be very controversial. It's a little bit harsh topic indeed. So about ESM is Emacs script module. Emacs script is actually the formal name of JavaScript because JavaScript is actually the trademark. So we couldn't use that name. Actually, JavaScript is actually called Emacs script, which is ES. And so ESM stands for Emacs script module, which is a standard module format in the JavaScript ecosystem, while the other thing is called CJS, which is Common JS. It's something like people doing to require modules before ESM was a thing. This is like mainly introduced by Node.js and a bunch of things. So that was a kind of de facto standard back at the time, where JavaScript wasn't designed for being modular at all. So now with ESM, it becomes a standard, which is actually hard to imagine. It's already over a decade since this standard comes up. We were still fighting against CJS and ESM, and the whole ecosystem is still adapting to it.
You think that Oracle will never sort of budge on their trademark there and
I don't know.
I know there was something that came up last year, right? About them getting challenged on this. The time of this recording is March 2025.
Yeah, I think right now it's still not really progressing from my radar. It's just Dino is trying hard to make this for the community. Let's get back to the name because JavaScript becomes a term that everybody uses. It shouldn't be a trademark that doesn't have any effect. But I think from the Oracle side, it seems to be a little bit, I don't know, ambiguous. It's just, you don't know what's their attitude about it. Yeah, for now, that's still call it ESM. I don't know if someday we can call it JSM something, but we'll see.
Do you think that this sort of divide between ESM and the common JS and classic formats you might see have caused any sort of stiflement in these JavaScript ecosystem? Because you could also argue that the bifurcation of two different ways or a few different ways to include other packages and essentially deal with modules in your code, those several different ways have ushered in more creativity, more work to be put into writing libraries and stuff. The low-hanging fruit is, no, it's not good, and it's causing rigidity in the way that we assemble our applications. So curious on your take there.
Yeah, I'm actually relatively young in this ecosystem. When I starting to get into this world, I think ESM is already something that people discuss about. But I know that before we have more formats, even more, it's like AMD, UMD, IIFE, something like that. It's just like people trying to, because there's something missing and there's no standard for it. So like people trying to invent things and trying to build conventions. And also you have JavaScript working in the node and working in the browser, totally different environment. And so the context is different and something like that. So like UMD is like trying to be like universal. It can act as a IIFE in the browser. Well, that's being requireable as CommonJS in Node.js, something like that. I guess that at that time that would be more chaotic. But right now, I think the same is like, because ESM is actually the standard and the only standard of JavaScript. So I think that's something that everybody is agrees on to move forward to the standard. And then we can see that still people are starting to move into ESM. That's still some part of CJS is still remaining, mostly because some of the packages that didn't get updated at all, or there is some like compatible concern. Is just because if you change CJS to ESM, because the format is different, so there will be a breaking change, and that can break people's code, or they will never upgrade.
Do you think that developers who are very tied to CJS, or developers who are maintaining packages and libraries that might be based or originally written in those formats, are they going to just need to bite the bullet and get used to ESM? Do you think this is something that is going to cause a certain population to be left behind and be permanently fragmented? Because that's something that's totally happened in languages before, where there's just like a cohort of folks and they say, I think this is just how we're going to do it. And then you end up having two different things living forever, which is what we have now. But looking long term, sort of your vibe check on the ecosystem surrounding this.
Yeah, I think indeed there is a like multiple voice, like different direction, different concern. But I think in general, like people are positive about moving to ESM, but it's a calculation between like trade-off, right? It's like the cost of migration, the cost of breaking the ecosystem over like the benefits ESM could get. I think for like front-end framework or front-end libraries, that could be like more beneficial by moving to ESM, because you got static analyze, tree shaking or something. So you can ship less code to the browser, where that's like the code you are never going to execute, that they can be removed. While the CJS, like the tree shaking, it will be like way harder and also less accurate. But also like on the other hand, like some package were never designed to be shipped into the browser, like some Node.js packages, like they're designed to write the files, like accessing to the file system or accessing to the IO, which they don't get the direct benefit of moving to ESM because CJS would work. So that's something. But I also don't think that's like two distinct words between ESM and CJS, because now you can interop between CJS and ESM. So you can have an ESM package that's requiring or depending on a CJS package. That's totally fine. And most of the time, you don't really notice that unless you dig into the code. The tricky thing is you could use CJS inside ESM, but you couldn't use ESM inside a CJS. So in a CJS module, you couldn't import a ESM because ESM is naturally asynchronized. It's designed to be asynchronized because it was designed for JavaScript, and JavaScript mostly runs on browser. And when you're requiring a file, usually the browser needs to do a network request. So that's network request can take time. Naturally, ESM is designed to be asynchronized when you import a file. While the CJS, the require module, which is designed to be sync. So then the two things is incompatible. That's changed until very recently. Node.js starting to ship require ESM feature. That allows you to require an ESM if there is nothing in the module tree is async. So Node can kind of block the thread or something to work that way. That allows you to importing ESM in CJS. So that's make this like a blend between like switching between these two module systems a lot easier than before. So that's also one of the reasons I think that's probably should be the time for us to move forward to ESM, because there is some pushback or some concern like preventing us from moving to ESM. One is like you couldn't use ESM in CJS, but now you could. After 2 months, when Node 18 gets end of life, and then the latest patch of version 20, 22, 24, they'll get this require ESM feature. After 2 months, the long-term support Node version would get this feature. So library author could more confidently drop in CJS and for people to migrate to ESM.
Would you say that in general, a developer who is maintaining an open source package would end up spending less time maintaining their work if they were to migrate from either a hybrid or a CJS code base into ESM? Because, hey, do it now. You can go both ways, require both ways. And now you don't
Yeah.
have to maintain two different areas of pluggability.
Before actually moving to ESM only, there's also approach that's like you mentioned, hybrid. We call dual module. Dual module means that you ship CJS and ESM at the same time with different entry. So nodes would actually smartly detect who is going to using it. So if you require a module and this module provided CJS version, you're going to use the CJS version. And if you import a module using ESM, it will use the ESM format. That's something like you could supporting the legacy usage and the new ESM usage at the same time. So that's the trade-off a lot of libraries are doing right now to supporting ESM while being backward compatible. But yeah, that's the thing that I'm trying to push harder a little bit to say we can go ESM only now because you don't need to maintain version because of we have required ESM and also the top level tooling that consume the code more and more they support ESM natively.
What's one of the biggest pains you see developers facing when they have to maintain this dual format package? Is it just work? Is there a larger bug spread typically that might be a stain, like a big red X on some dual format packages? Hey, you don't know what's in here. Yeah, curious how that particular checkbox of it being dual format might affect what you're using.
Yeah, there's a bunch of tools that's kind already helping that. So it's just like, for example, like Unbuild or TS Up, they all offer like dual module outputting. So basically the common practice is that you authoring your code in ESM and then you use a build tool to bundle your app, to bundle your library. And then you can to do a transpiling and to convert ESM to CJS, which is easier because ESM is static and analyzable, while the CJS will be harder. So ESM is easier to convert to CJS in that case. So there's a tool that's already making it very simple. You just format column and then an array, you put ESM and CJS, it will output two formats. And so in terms of authoring experience, I think that should be fine. I think the challenge becomes to be like the distribution or like shipping, how you export this library as an NPM package to have two entry or like conditionally. So there's some tricks or some article to explain these things. So if you do it very carefully, you should get it right. But I think that's the most challenging part is fundamentally CJS and ESM are designed different. So ESM has a default export and named export. So that means a module could have multiple, it can export multiple functions or it can export multiple objects. While CJS is actually have only one export. And that exports, usually people will export an object with the keys of some functions. But there's no default export in CJS, or the object itself is export. So that depends how you think it. Either you have only default or only named, but then it doesn't mapping into the formats the exports ESM has. So that becomes the challenge because when you export default and function, how do you present that in CJS? So usually you export an object with default key as the function, but then it has a conflict because usually when you import that module in ESM, you get the function, but when you require that, then you get an object with a key of default. So then you have the interop. So usually what we do is check if there is a default key in the object, and if we do, and we get a key of it. So that's a little bit dirty, and also depends on how you export to the users. That can be a little bit tricky.
Are there any other areas of uncertainty or hacky connections that need to be done in order to bridge the ESM world to the CJS world?
Yeah, there is also like some problem like types. So ideally, you should expect the same type is actually because CJS and ESM expose differently. So the type is actually different. So you basically need to duplicate your types into two files. And we have JS as a file extension. And then because of CJS and ESM, now we have .cjs and .mjs as a file extension. And for TypeScript, usually you have a type definition file called .d.ts. And now with that, you have .d.cts and .d.mts. So that's very tricky. And then usually you need to ship all three of them in order to get these things right. So Yeah, that's a lot of things concern. And also because of that, sometimes when you're shipping it, you don't even notice until user consume it. So it's really hard to do the test because that's not part of your logic. That's part of the integration of how you compose this package. So that's a risk of the runtime error that's you couldn't catch TypeScript or with a linter.
If you're thinking about your end user experience here and you're assuming the maintainer of a package, right? Or some library.
It's the
And
consumer of the library.
the consumer in this scenario that we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
But on the other end of the stick, like if you're the person who's watching your consumers using your library or using your code, and you want to think about switching to ESM, what are some of the things you think would go into assessing if that's the right time for your code base, for your repo? Is there ever a scenario, Anthony, where it's just so much work and not worth it that you just would prompt a full rewrite? Or do you think in general the tooling and what's out there for maintainers is sufficient no matter what to tackle this? And are there any other things you would look at when examining a open source piece of code, or any code for that matter, that makes you say, yes, don't do all the work to put this into ESM. It's not ready, or it's not the right time? Do you see that being a reality at any point?
So I think it depends, indeed depends on what stack your project is using. And if you're using like, I don't know, latest libraries or latest framework, most of them are now built on top of Vite. And Vite is designed for ESM ground up. And that's the fact that allows you to use any ESM library you want. So that should be fine, like for your library to be ESM only. So I think the top level tooling are catching up. If you're still on Webpack 4 or something, that would be a little bit challenging. But I think if we're talking about Webpack, then we're probably talking about front-end project, right? So then if your build tool doesn't support ESM, which means they will be very old. All the modern tool will support that. So you should probably consider upgrading for your build tools or for your bundler first, and then you can be ready to adopt ESM. And I think on the other hand, if you're talking about Node.js applications like a backend or something, or like a CLI or script, something, then we require ESM. That's a feature shipping the latest node. That shouldn't be your concern. Then you can use ESM and CJS interchangeably. You don't really need to concern about that. Yeah, I think the only case you will be trapped in CJS, that will be you're still on a very legacy build tool, which hopefully nobody has that issue right now.
Yeah, and that's also interesting where it's, if you are in such an old build tool, go do that first. That's probably more important. And then no matter what, it might be a good time to transition over to ESM if you're a developer. Let's say you're looking through your packages as a developer and tools that you're importing and using. You might benefit from knowing how they're written, right? And how they're structured. And you have the node modules inspector, Anthony. What is that? How does it work? And how do you hope people will use it to bring value to themselves and their team?
Yeah. So initially I come up with the idea, like I want to check how many packages in my node modules are ESM or CJS. So basically I want to know my dependencies ESM adoption. So I know who is still lagging behind and if I could help them or not, or if we can like moving to an alternative or something. I want to check in that. And I will firstly building a CLI to present it. I find, oh, actually there is way more data to present and the CLI is not a good interface to present this complex data. I ended up with a UI, like a front-end UI, like you will send the data, parse the data of your node modules, the whole tree and the whole relationship to the front end. And the front end would use like a graph library to show the relationship with each dependency, each package. So you can search for a package to know why you have that package and who is depending on that and what version you are on and how old these dependencies are. And I actually find my oldest dependency in my node module is actually over 12 years. So that's a little bit scary in the way.
Wow.
With the tool, you can see that.
And it graphs it all out like an obsidian format, almost like a tree.
And right now it's in its own like UI and it's interactive. You can search, you can filter, something like that. But yeah, I think maybe I could figure out like a better presentation for API usage. So maybe you can get the data and then you can render it yourself in a way you want to do it.
Where can people find this tool? And is it called the Node Modules Inspector? Is that like the proper name for it?
Yeah, if it's on NPM, it's Node Module Inspector with dash in between. Or I have a deployed version. It's like node dash modules.dev. And you can run install in your browser and then you can get the tray of it and you can inspect it. Yeah.
Nice. Do you plan to use this for security purposes at all? Naturally, being able to inspect your packages and find one that's 12 years old is very useful. And that's almost security related. Do you plan on developing more on this, adding more in any way?
Yeah, I think right now the project is adopting very fast because people are sending PRs and throwing me ideas. So I recently add like a deprecation window. So like you can know which packages or which versions are being deprecated and their deprecate message. It's more intuitive rather than a red message when you install it. So now you can see why you have that modules or something. Yeah, in terms of security, I don't know exactly how to do that, but I think I probably could fetch some security database to know which version is in vulnerability and we could present it for sure. And also that depends on not every vulnerability is relevant to your project, even if it's in your dependency. If you don't use that feature, that's not relevant to you. Yeah, you give me a great idea and I could probably see how we can bring this.
Yeah, there's got to be like
bring this up.
some open database out there or something of threat intel coming in. But it's just really cool to be able to view it in a tree. That's neat. I have no idea what packages my stuff's using. So again, it was node-inspector.dev, the hosted version. Anthony, if people want to check it out. What was the web address? It was node-inspector.dev.
It's
Is that
node
correct?
modules.dev.
Nodemodules.dev. Awesome. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. So we're getting close to the end of the podcast. We do this thing at the end now called Quick Round. So I'm going to shoot some questions at you, and the whole purpose is just to see what rattles off your head without a ton of thinking. So do your best, and we have 3 questions. So let's get through them. Starting with question number 1. What's the one thing you wish package maintainers knew about making the switch to ESM? Something that maybe they don't know right now.
Yeah, there's a new feature called Require ESM in Node.js, which is going to be available like in all the evergreen Node versions. So that means you can ship ESM-Only more frequently without concerning about breaking the others.
That was a huge one that we were just talking about in the podcast. Like it's going to enable so many people to actually move forward and not have that other complaint. So that's got to be it. Okay. Question number 2. If someone is on the fence about moving to ESM only, what would you say to convince them?
Yeah, I think that would depend on the use case. I would say first you can go to dual format to be safe. And then you can evaluate like your use case, like all your users, how they use or how you consume your libraries. And if they are all, like a majority of them are on the modern tools and supporting ESM, that you can probably consider like moving to ESM because they are already being ready for that.
And what is the number one reason for folks to go ESM only? And this can be on either the package maintainer or the typical developer side. What's the number one reason?
Yeah, I think the number one reason is ESM is the only standard of JavaScript modules, and that's future proof. And that's the direction that everybody is moving to.
Awesome. That was short and sweet. Knocked all the nails on the head. Thank you, Anthony. So as everybody's listening knows from your intro, like you're a developer over at Nuxt Labs, you're hugely invested in the JavaScript ecosystem. Anthony's even putting out tools. Like we have the node module inspectors coming out now. So I'm sure people are going to want to keep up to date with more stuff you're putting out, Anthony, and your blog. That's where we learned about this posting by you going to ESM only. So if people want to go to your blog, what is the blog address? And we'll also have a link in the show notes.
Yeah, it's antfu.me.
antfu.me. Got it. Okay. And then if people wanted to keep up to date with you professionally, like more on the social side, where would you recommend folks follow you? Is it like a LinkedIn or a Twitter or a Blue Sky or all of them?
Yeah, I'm mainly on Blue Sky right now, and it's the same as my website. So now it allows you to bind the domain to it. So you can find that,
nice.
or you can go to my website and there's a link to it.
Awesome. All right, Anthony, thank you so much for your time. It was interesting for me to learn more about ESM and what the temperature of the ecosystem was, because it's always this like cloudy, nebulous thing that's up there. It's like floating around. And it's exciting to hear that we're going to have bidirectional requires. So maybe we'll see a big move in the ecosystem. But yeah, thanks again for your time. It was awesome to learn about where the ecosystem's heading.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me and the chance to talk about this. And I hope everybody would give a chance to consider it and helping the ecosystem to move into ESM. Yeah, thank you.